People who unintentionally overheard a breakup that belonged in a Netflix drama, What Happened? I was sitting in a cramped laundromat on a Tuesday night that already felt cursed because the only washing machine that actually worked was the one closest to the bathroom that smelled like regret and bleach. I had my headphones in but nothing playing, which is important because from the outside, I probably looked blissfully ignorant while accidentally becoming an unwilling witness to the emotional equivalent of a car crash in slow motion. A couple sat down on the plastic chairs across from me, and at first, they looked like every other exhausted pair you see doing laundry together, quietly mad at the universe and each other in equal measure. They didn't touch, didn't make eye contact, and the air around them felt tight in that way where you can practically hear a fight warming up like an engine. I tried to focus on my phone, but then the guy sighed in a way that sounded rehearsed, like he'd practiced it in the car on the way over, and I knew something bad was about to happen. He said her name softly at first, which immediately told me this was not a casual conversation because no one says your full name gently unless they're about to ruin your week. She didn't answer, just stared at the dryer tumbling what looked like a single sock, which somehow made the moment more tragic. He said he couldn't keep pretending everything was fine, which is breakup code for "I've already emotionally left and you're about to find out." She laughed once, sharp and humorless, and asked if this was really happening in a laundromat next to a broken vending machine. He told her there's never a good place for these conversations, which felt like a lie even to me, a total stranger folding socks nearby. She said that if he was about to confess to cheating, she'd prefer he just say it instead of circling it like a coward. He immediately got defensive, which I've learned is always the worst possible response in moments like that, and said it wasn't cheating exactly. At that point, I physically stopped folding my laundry because my survival instincts told me this was important. He explained that he'd been emotionally close to a coworker for the past year, and that it just happened naturally, which made her finally turn and look at him. She asked, very calmly, if this emotional closeness included the hotel charges on their joint credit card from 3 months ago. The silence after that was so loud that even the washing machines felt awkward. His face went pale in a way I didn't know was possible under fluorescent lighting, and I swear I saw his soul leave his body for a second. He asked how she knew about that, which is when she told him she'd known for months and had been waiting to see if he'd ever tell the truth on his own. That revelation alone would have been enough for a solid Reddit post, but somehow it was only the beginning. She told him she stayed because he'd promised he was just stressed, just tired, just going through a phase, and she wanted to believe him because believing him was easier than starting over. He tried to apologize, but his apology kept tripping over excuses, which made it feel more like a defense statement than remorse. She asked him if the coworker knew he still lived with his girlfriend, and he hesitated just long enough to answer the question anyway. That hesitation broke something in her, and I could see it in the way her shoulders dropped like she'd finally accepted gravity. She told him that she'd been saving for months to surprise him with tickets to visit his parents, which he always said he missed but never made time for. He stared at the floor like it might rescue him, which it did not. She pulled her phone out and canceled something, then said quietly that those tickets were non-refundable, but at least she'd get the miles. The guy looked up then, offended, as if airline points were the real injustice here. He said he never meant to hurt her, which made her laugh again, except this time it sounded tired instead of sharp. She told him that intent doesn't matter when the damage is already done, and that sentence alone felt like it came from years of emotional debt. Then she said the coworker had messaged her last week by accident, thinking she was him, and thanked her for being understanding. I swear every dryer in the place stopped at that exact moment, even though logically I know they didn't. He tried to stand up, maybe to explain, maybe to run, but she told him to sit down because she wasn't finished. She said she wanted him to hear it out loud because he'd robbed her of the truth for too long. She told him that she'd already lined up a new apartment, moved her important documents to her sister's house, and changed all her passwords. He looked genuinely shocked, like he thought he was the main character in this story, only to realize he was barely a subplot now. She said the only reason she hadn't left yet was because she wanted to see if he was capable of honesty when it actually mattered. Apparently, the laundromat was the moment it mattered. He asked if there was any chance to fix things, and she said that question should have been asked a year ago. She stood up, grabbed her laundry basket, and told him he could keep the couch, the TV, and the blender he never cleaned anyway. Then she paused, turned back, and told him that the coworker should probably get tested because honesty apparently wasn't his strong suit. That line landed like a nuclear bomb, and even the guy next to me pretending to read a newspaper flinched. The guy started crying then, full body shaking, which felt almost unfair considering how composed she was being. She told him she hoped he figured himself out, but not at her expense anymore. As she walked out, she wished me a good night like we were just two normal people sharing a space, which somehow made everything feel more surreal. The door closed behind her, and the guy sat there alone, surrounded by spinning laundry and the consequences of his own decisions. I finished folding my clothes in silence, feeling like I just binge-watched an entire season of a breakup drama without consenting to it. When I left, he was still sitting there, staring at his phone like it might undo the last 10 minutes. I drove home in complete silence because music felt inappropriate after witnessing something that raw. To this day, I can't go into that laundromat without thinking about how truth has a way of surfacing in the least glamorous places possible. And honestly, I hope she's doing great, earning miles, living peacefully, and never doing laundry with someone who lies to her ever again. I was sitting in the corner of a nearly empty coffee shop that smelled like burnt espresso and regret, pretending to read emails while actually dissociating after a long week, when the couple at the table next to me sat down with the kind of stiff politeness that already felt like foreshadowing. They didn't touch each other when they sat, which felt important even before anything happened. He set his phone face down like he was preparing for a deposition. She kept her coat on, which in retrospect should have been my first clue that this was not a casual chat. At first, their voices were low and careful, the way people talk when they're trying not to crack in public. I was absolutely not trying to eavesdrop, but they were whispering with the intensity of people trying to contain a wildfire, which somehow made every word travel farther. She started with, "I just need you to be honest with me right now," and my soul immediately leaned closer. He replied, "I am being honest," which is universally known as the prelude to a lie. There was a pause so long it felt like the coffee shop's ambient playlist changed just to fill it. Then she asked him very calmly if he had slept with her friend Megan. He laughed, not in a funny way, but in that panicked, "my body betrayed me" way. He said, "What? No, that's crazy." And she didn't blink once, which was terrifying. She took out her phone, unlocked it with a level of calm that suggested premeditation, and placed it between them like evidence. She said she had screenshots. He asked, "Screenshots of what?" which was a mistake you could feel ripple through the room. She scrolled, nodded once, and said, "You tell me." He went pale in a way I didn't know was physically possible without fainting. At this point, I was frozen, cup halfway to my mouth, fully trapped as a witness to a live emotional car crash. He started talking very fast, saying things like, "It wasn't like that," and "we were drunk," and "it only happened once," which answered the question more clearly than any confession. She let him talk himself into a hole so deep I swear you could hear the dirt falling. Then she asked if he remembered the weekend he told her he was sick and couldn't come to her sister's wedding. He said yes. She said Megan had sent her a photo of him asleep in Megan's bed that same weekend, wearing the sweatshirt she had bought him for Christmas. I physically had to look away because it felt illegal to witness. He tried to argue that he didn't remember sending that photo, which was somehow worse than admitting everything. She told him Megan confessed after feeling guilty, and the air quotes were implied but devastating. He then said, "And I swear this is real. I didn't think you'd ever find out." She laughed once, sharp and broken, and said, "That's the part that hurts the most." At this point, people at other tables were absolutely listening too, but no one moved, like we were all afraid to break the spell. She asked him how long it had been going on, He said a few weeks, which she immediately disproved by mentioning dates from months ago. He then tried to say time felt weird because of stress at work. She told him stress didn't make you sleep with her best friend repeatedly. He reached for her hand. She pulled it away, and I felt that movement in my chest. He started crying, real crying, not movie crying, and apologized over and over. She stayed eerily composed, like she had already cried every tear privately and was now just doing cleanup. She said she had already packed his things. He asked where he was supposed to go. She said Megan offered to let him stay with her, and that line landed like a bomb. He looked genuinely shocked, which was almost funny if it wasn't so bleak. She told him Megan had blocked him after confessing and wanted nothing to do with him. He whispered, "So I lost both of you?" And she replied, "No, you threw us away." That sentence will live rent-free in my head forever. He tried one last time, saying he loved her and made a mistake. She asked how many mistakes it took to delete their future together. He had no answer. She stood up, finally took off her coat, and placed her keys on the table. She told him the locks were changed and he needed to coordinate pickup through her brother. He nodded like a child being scolded. She looked around, noticed everyone pretending not to stare, and said, "Sorry," to the room, which somehow broke my heart more than anything else. She left without looking back. He stayed seated for a long time, staring at nothing, while his coffee went untouched. Eventually, he put his phone face up and just stared at it like it might save him. No one approached him. No one should have. After a while, he stood, knocked his chair over, didn't fix it, and walked out. The barista quietly went over to clean the table like she was defusing a bomb. The entire shop exhaled at once. I sat there for another 10 minutes, unable to move, replaying every sentence in my head. I've overheard arguments before, but this felt like watching the exact moment someone's life forked permanently. I went home and hugged my partner harder than usual without explaining why. That breakup wasn't mine, but it lodged itself into my memory like I had lived it. To this day, whenever someone says, "I just need you to be honest with me," I feel my stomach drop. Some stories don't need Netflix. They just need thin walls, bad timing, and a coffee shop with nowhere to hide. I was sitting in a nail salon because my sister begged me to come with her, and I was killing time scrolling on my phone, half listening to the low hum of dryers and the constant clack of acrylic tips, when I realized the couple 2 chairs down from me were having a conversation that absolutely should not have been happening in public. At first, it sounded normal, like the kind of tense whisper couples do when they think they're being discreet. But the room was quiet enough that every word carried, and I slowly understood I was about to witness the emotional equivalent of a car crash in slow motion. The guy kept saying things like, "I just think we need honesty," which is always the verbal equivalent of someone reaching for the fire extinguisher after the building is already on fire. The woman was staring straight ahead at her nails, completely still, like if she didn't move, maybe the moment wouldn't see her. I remember thinking I should put my headphones in, but I didn't, because curiosity is a disease and I am terminal. She finally said very calmly that she already knew about the other apartment, and the guy's face visibly drained of color like someone had unplugged him. He asked what she meant, which is the dumbest question anyone can ask when they're caught. She explained, still calm, that she had been watering his plants while he was working late, and she noticed a toothbrush that wasn't his, and women just know when a toothbrush doesn't belong. The nail techs stopped talking to each other entirely, and even the dryers seemed quieter, like the universe itself wanted to hear the rest. He laughed, actually laughed, and said she was being paranoid, which made her finally turn her head and look at him for the first time. She told him she'd also found a lease agreement in his glove compartment with his name and another woman's name on it, dated 6 months ago. He started talking very fast, which is another universal sign of guilt, and said it was just for tax reasons and that he was helping a friend out. She nodded slowly and said she'd met the friend. That was when the entire salon collectively leaned in without physically moving. She said she met her because she accidentally sat next to her at a brunch place and recognized his stupid jacket. the one he never wore because he said it made him look like a divorced dad. She described in detail how the other woman talked about her boyfriend who hated cilantro, which he despised with a passion, and how they were planning a trip to Mexico in November. The guy tried to interrupt, but she raised her voice just enough to cut him off, still not yelling, which somehow made it worse. She said she didn't say anything at brunch because she wanted to see how long he'd keep lying. He looked around the salon like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him, but the floor was clearly on her side. He asked her why she didn't confront him sooner, and she said she wanted to enjoy her birthday first. That sentence hit harder than anything else she said. She explained that the Mexico trip was supposed to be for her birthday, and she wanted one last good memory before everything exploded. The woman doing my nails actually paused mid-file and whispered, "Oh my God," under her breath. The guy finally snapped and asked why she was humiliating him like this, which was a wild choice given the circumstances. She told him he humiliated himself when he introduced her as a friend at his work party 3 months ago. He denied that too, even though she immediately reminded him that his boss had asked her what department she worked in. At this point, I was no longer pretending to look at my phone, neither was anyone else. She said she already moved her stuff out that morning while he was working late, and she left the keys on the counter next to the ring. He stared at her hands and noticed she wasn't wearing it, which somehow made the silence heavier. He asked if she was really ending everything over a misunderstanding, and she laughed for the first time, but it wasn't happy. She said the misunderstanding was that he thought he was smarter than her. She told him she already messaged the other woman and sent screenshots, including the texts where he said he was single but complicated. He whispered her name like he wanted sympathy, and she told him not to say it anymore because it didn't belong to him now. Someone across the room actually gasped out loud. The nail tech gently asked if everything was okay, and the woman smiled politely and said yes. She was just about to leave. She paid, tipped generously, and stood up without looking at him again. He followed her out, still talking, still pleading, still trying to control the narrative. The door closed behind them, but we could still hear his voice muffled through the glass. Nobody spoke for a full 30 seconds. Then one of the nail techs said, "Men," like it was a diagnosis. My sister leaned over and whispered that she felt like she just watched a season finale. I realized my hands were shaking slightly, even though none of this involved me. The rest of the appointment felt surreal, like the air had been permanently altered. When we left, the guy was gone, but the woman was sitting on the curb outside, texting calmly, her posture relaxed in a way it hadn't been inside. I wanted to tell her she handled it like a legend, but I didn't want to intrude. Instead, I just held the door for her when she stood up, and she smiled at me like she knew I'd been there the whole time. On the drive home, my sister and I replayed every detail like we were investigators. We talked about how terrifying calm can be when it replaces anger. We talked about how long lies can live before they finally collapse. I thought about how many public places have quietly hosted life-altering moments without anyone planning it that way. I still think about that woman sometimes, especially when I hear someone say they want closure. She didn't want closure. She wanted truth, dignity, and an audience big enough to make sure he couldn't rewrite what happened later. Honestly, I don't blame her at all. I was sitting in a laundromat on a rainy Sunday afternoon, killing time and doom scrolling while my clothes rattled aggressively in a dryer that sounded like it was fighting for its life. 2 people came in and sat directly behind me, close enough that I could hear every word, but far enough that pretending I wasn't listening felt morally acceptable. At first it sounded like a normal couple argument, that low, tight whisper people use when they don't want strangers involved. But it escalated quickly in the way arguments only do when something has already been rotting for a long time. The woman started crying in this exhausted, hollow way that didn't sound theatrical at all, which somehow made it worse, and she asked him if he ever actually planned on telling her the truth. He went silent for so long that I thought the argument had ended, but then he said very calmly, "I thought if I waited long enough, it wouldn't matter anymore." That line alone made my stomach drop, because you don't say something like that unless you've been lying for months, maybe years. She asked him how long, and he said, "Since before we moved in together." which made her laugh in that sharp, broken way people laugh right before they completely fall apart. She reminded him that she had turned down a job across the country for him, that she'd helped pay off his debt, that she'd defended him to her family when they warned her he was selfish. He didn't deny any of it, which somehow felt crueler than arguing, and instead just kept saying he didn't know how to stop once it started. At some point, she asked if he loved the other person, and his pause before answering was long enough that even the dryers seemed quieter, like the universe itself was leaning in. When he finally said, "I don't know," she stood up, grabbed her laundry basket, and said she hoped he one day understood how completely he'd erased her future without asking. She walked out still crying, still holding it together, and he just sat there staring at the floor like a man who had just watched his entire life collapse, but didn't have the emotional tools to react. I finished my laundry in silence, folded my clothes wrong, went home, and cried about a breakup that wasn't mine but felt heavier than some of my own.